at 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. The bank called to ask if I had authorized a transfer of $28,450. I was buttering toast. The kitchen smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee grounds and the lemon detergent I use on the countertops. Outside the window, the maple tree in the yard stood bare, thin branches tapping lightly against the siding in the February wind. The radio on the fridge hummed an old Sinatra song, low and steady. "Mr. Harlan?" the young man on the line asked. His voice was polite in that professional way that means something is already wrong. "Yes. We're calling regarding 3 outgoing wire transfers initiated from your online account between 8:42 a.m. and 9:03 a.m. today. The amounts were $28,450, $31,000, and $27,200. We need to confirm that these transactions were authorized." I remember looking down at the butter knife in my hand. 3 numbers. Clean. Precise. Like someone had measured them. "That's over $80,000, I said slowly. "Yes, sir. A total of $86,650. There are moments when your body understands something before your mind does. My hand went cold. The knife slipped from my fingers and hit the ceramic plate with a sound sharper than it should have been. "No," I said. "I did not authorize anything." A pause. Keyboard tapping on his end. "Sir, the transfers were approved using your login credentials and 2-factor authentication. The confirmation code was sent to your phone number ending in 4421. I glanced at my cell phone, lying beside the sugar bowl. It was silent. No missed calls. No text messages. "That's impossible," I said. "I haven't even turned my computer on today. I'm 71 years old. I turn it on only when I must." "Sir, have you shared your login information with anyone? A family member, perhaps?" There was the question. I should have said no immediately. Instead, I hesitated. 3 years ago, after Margaret died, my daughter insisted we simplify things. That was her word. Simplify. "You shouldn't be handling all this alone, Dad," she had said in my living room, perched on the edge of the beige armchair Margaret picked out in 2008. "What if something happens? What if you forget a password? Let me help." Her name is Claire. She is 42, organized, efficient, always with a leather planner tucked under her arm and a smartwatch blinking on her wrist like a second pulse. I gave her limited access to my accounts in June 2023. I remember the date because it was 2 days after what would have been Margaret's 69th birthday. I was tired. Grief makes paperwork feel heavier. "Just in case," Claire said. "I won't touch anything without asking." I believed her. On the phone, I cleared my throat. "My daughter has access," I admitted. "But she wouldn't. There must be some mistake." The banker did not respond to the unfinished sentence. "We're placing a temporary hold on your account, Mr. Harlan. I recommend you come into the branch today with identification. We need to review these transactions in person." "Where did the money go?" I asked. "To an account under the name Caldwell Development Group, LLC. Caldwell. That's my son-in-law's last name. The maple branch scratched against the house again. A dry, skeletal sound. "Sir," the banker prompted gently. "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." When the call ended, the kitchen felt too quiet. Even Sinatra had stopped. I sat down at the table. The toast had gone cold. Butter pooled in small yellow craters. $86,650. My total retirement savings as of January 31st stood at $412,300. That includes a certificate of deposit I rolled over last summer at 4.8%, the modest brokerage account Margaret and I built over 38 years of cautious investing, and the pension that drips in every month like a careful faucet, $3,940 after taxes. I know these numbers the way some men know baseball statistics. You don't survive widowhood without counting. I reached for my checkbook, not because I needed it, but because it steadies me to touch paper. The leather cover is cracked at the corners. Inside, my handwriting grows shakier every year. June 14th, 2023. Authorized Claire access. Online credentials shared. October 2nd, 2023. Loan to Claire and Daniel. $12,500 temporary for bridge financing. March 18th, 2024. Transfer $9,800 medical expenses for Ethan's braces. August 5th, 2024. $24,000. Down payment assistance. I had written assistance each time. Not gift. Not loan. Assistance. There's a difference in a man's mind. My phone buzzed. Claire's name lit up the screen, bright and cheerful as always. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad, did the bank call you? Her voice was quick, breathless. Background noise, traffic maybe, or a cafe. Yes, I said. A small exhale. Okay, good. I was going to explain. Explain. I noticed some unusual activity on your account this morning, she continued. Don't panic. It's for the investment, Daniel, and I told you about the Riverside project. Remember? No, I said. I don't remember authorizing $86,000. It's not 86, Dad. It's just under 90. And it's temporary. We had to move quickly to secure the property. It's a short-term flip. 3 months, maybe 4. We're projected to net at least $140,000 profit. She spoke in numbers the way salesmen do, rounded, confident upward. You moved the money without asking me, I said. There was a pause. Not long, just enough. We talked about supporting each other, she replied carefully. You said you wanted to see us succeed. Daniel's company needed liquidity fast. I didn't want to bother you with paperwork first thing in the morning. I stood up from the table and walked to the window. The yard looked smaller than it used to. Or maybe I've grown tired. Claire, I said quietly, that account is not liquidity. It's your mother's life insurance. It's 40 years of not taking vacations. Another pause. Longer this time. You're overreacting, she said, and there was a thinness in her tone I hadn't heard before. It's not like we're stealing from you. Not like we're stealing from you. The words settled in my chest like cold metal. I'm going to the bank, I said. Dad, please don't make this dramatic. Daniel already signed the purchase agreement at 8:55. If you freeze the funds, we'll lose the property and the deposit. That's $15,000 non-refundable. I almost laughed. At 8:55 a.m., while I was buttering toast, my son-in-law was signing something with my money. I'll call you later, I said. Dad. I ended the call. For a long moment, I stood there in the kitchen Margaret had insisted on remodeling in 2016. White cabinets, brushed nickel handles, the expensive Bosch dishwasher we debated for 3 weeks before buying. She had run her fingers along the countertop and said, "This will last us the rest of our lives." She was wrong about the us. I put on my coat. It still hangs by the door on the brass hook. She installed herself. At 9:52 a.m., I locked the house and walked to my car. The bank had called me first. And for the first time in my life, I was afraid they would not be the last. If you believe older voices still matter, support this channel with a like and a subscription. The branch manager's office smelled like burnt coffee and carpet cleaner. It was 10:38 a.m. when I sat down across from a woman named Patricia Lyle, whose gray blazer matched the metal filing cabinets behind her. She had a neat stack of printed statements in front of her and a pen aligned perfectly parallel to the edge of the desk. Orderly, controlled, the opposite of how I felt. Mr. Harlan, she said gently, sliding the papers toward me. These are the transactions from the past 12 months. 12 months. I adjusted my glasses and began to read. October 2nd, $12,500. March 18th, $9,800. August 5th, $24,000. November 21st, $6,200. January 14th, $14,750. February 3rd, $18,900. February 18th, $86,650. Each one labeled either authorized online transfer or wire. Client approved. Client approved, I repeated quietly. Patricia folded her hands. All transactions were initiated from a device registered under your online profile. The IP address traces to a residential connection on Hawthorne Drive. Hawthorne Drive, Claire's house, the one I helped them buy. In August 2024, Daniel had stood in my living room with a folder tucked under his arm. His tie loosened, as if he'd just come from something important. "A fantastic opportunity, Frank," he had said, calling me Frank instead of Dad, which he does when he wants to sound professional. 3-bedroom, good school district. Appreciation trend at 6.4% annually. We just need help with the down payment. $75,000 gets us in. I remember the smell of pot roast that day. I'd had it in the oven since noon. Margaret's recipe, thyme, bay leaf, carrots cut thick. 75,000 is not small change, I had replied. Claire had reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It's not a gift, Dad. Think of it as an early inheritance. You'll get it back if we ever sell. Early inheritance, as if I were already halfway underground. I transferred $24,000 that August afternoon. The rest, Daniel said, would come from other sources. I didn't ask which. Now I looked at the numbers in Patricia's office and felt something close around my ribs. These smaller transfers, I said, tapping the page, were never discussed. Patricia nodded. You can formally dispute them. However, because access was shared and authentication codes were used, recovery may require legal action. Legal action against my own daughter. The words tasted metallic. When I left the bank at 11:26 a.m., the winter sun was too bright. I sat in my car for a full minute before starting the engine. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked thinner than I remembered. I drove not home but to Hawthorne Drive. Their house has a blue front door and a decorative wreath Claire changes with the seasons. Today it was winter eucalyptus, tasteful, restrained. 2 SUVs in the driveway. Daniel's black Audi and Claire's silver Lexus. The Lexus was new. I noticed that immediately. I rang the doorbell at 11:58 a.m. Claire opened it within seconds, as if she had been standing there. Dad, she said too brightly, you didn't have to come all this way. I did, I answered. The foyer smelled of vanilla candles and something fried, maybe leftover bacon. Ethan's sneakers were tossed near the stairs. A tablet lay charging on the console table. Daniel appeared from the kitchen, sleeves rolled up. Frank, I was just about to call you. I'm sure, I said. We sat at their dining table. Reclaimed oak for $1,300 according to the story Claire proudly told last Thanksgiving. I remember because she said, it's an investment piece. Investment. I placed the bank statements flat between us. I want an explanation, I said. Claire didn't look at the papers. She looked at me. It's all for the Riverside property, she insisted. Daniel's company, Caldwell Development Group, secured a mixed-use building. We needed fast capital. $86,000? I asked. Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced behind his head. It's not 86 in isolation, he said calmly. It's leverage. We put in 90. We refinance in 3 months. We pull out 140 minimum. Your share would be proportional. My share, I repeated. Claire's tone sharpened. Dad, why are you acting like this? You've always supported us. Support is not the same as surrender, I said. There was a flicker in her eyes, annoyance. You have over 400,000 sitting in accounts earning what for percent? She pressed. Inflation is higher than that. You taught me not to let money sit idle. I did teach her that when she was 16. I showed her how compound interest worked on a yellow legal pad. $10,000 at 5% over 20 years. I was proud of how quickly she understood. You didn't ask, I said quietly. We didn't have time. Daniel cut in. The seller gave us a 48-hour window. If we hesitated, we'd lose the deal and the $15,000 earnest deposit. And if I hesitated? I asked. Claire's jaw tightened. Dad, we are not your enemies. The room felt smaller. The walls decorated with framed photos. Ethan's soccer trophy. Their vacation in Napa. Claire in a tailored navy suit at some awards dinner. I noticed something else then. On the kitchen counter, beside the espresso machine, lay a brochure. Riverside Residences, Luxury Urban Living. Pre-construction pricing starting at $1.2 million. You're not flipping one unit, I said slowly. You're buying into a development. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Claire spoke first. It's a partnership, she said. Higher risk, higher reward. With my retirement, I said. Silence. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, a door closed. I want full documentation, I said at last. Contracts. Purchase agreements. Everything signed this morning at 8:55. Daniel's expression cooled. That's not how private placements work. It is now. Claire pushed back her chair abruptly. Why are you doing this? She demanded. After everything we built together? Built. I thought of the 12-hour shifts at the utility company. Of Margaret sewing Claire's prom dress to save $300. Of skipping vacations so tuition could be paid in full, $48,200 over 4 years. Little transfers. Big lies. I'm going home, I said, standing. You have until tomorrow morning to send me every document connected to Caldwell Development Group and Riverside. If I don't receive them, I will formally dispute every transfer. Claire's face hardened in a way I had never seen. You'd really drag your own daughter into court, she asked. I looked at her at the careful makeup, the expensive watch, the woman who once cried when her goldfish died. No, I said. You drag yourself. When I stepped outside, the winter air cut clean and sharp into my lungs. I had always believed exploitation was loud, shouting, slamming doors, broken plates. But this was quiet, just numbers and signatures, and the slow realization that the $86,000 this morning might not have been the beginning, only the first time the bank noticed. On Sunday at exactly 4:00 p.m., Claire hosted what she called a small family dinner. She texted me the invitation at 11:12 a.m. Let's not let this money thing ruin everything. Come over at 4. Ethan wants to show you something. I considered not going. I even took my coat off the hook and put back twice. But silence is a dangerous companion. It makes you imagine reconciliations that never come. So at 3:47 p.m., I parked again on Hawthorne Drive. The blue door was open this time. Laughter spilled out into the cold February air. Bright, performative laughter. Daniel's parents were there. I recognized his mother's voice before I saw her. Sharp, nasal, always hovering at the edge of complaint. Inside, the house was warmer than before. The dining table was extended, dressed in a linen runner and tall white candles. The smell of rosemary chicken and something sweet, apple crumble, perhaps, filled the air. Claire greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that landed slightly off target. Dad, she said, smiling too widely. I'm glad you came. Daniel shook my hand as if we were closing a deal. Frank. I took off my coat and hung it beside 3 others tailored wool, expensive labels. I wore the same charcoal jacket I've had for 9 winters. We sat down at 4:12 p.m. Ethan, 14 now, taller than his mother, scrolled on his phone until Claire nudged him. Show Grandpa, she prompted. He turned the screen toward me. A glossy rendering of a modern building by the river. Glass balconies, rooftop pool, riverside residences. Ethan said with rehearsed pride. Dad's project. Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his napkin carefully on his lap. We closed on the development partnership Friday, he announced. Secured a 12% equity stake. Friday, 2 days ago. With leverage, he added. Total capital injection, just under $410,000. The number landed heavily on the table between the salt and pepper shakers. I looked up slowly. 410,000? I repeated. Claire's smile flickered. Dad, don't, she whispered under her breath. Daniel continued, as if presenting quarterly results. We pooled resources. Strategic investors. Fast action. In 18 months, projected return is north of $1.3 million. Daniel's father let out an appreciative whistle. That's how you build wealth, he said. You move when opportunity knocks. My fork remained untouched beside my plate. Where, I asked carefully, did the rest of the capital come from? Daniel glanced at Claire. She answered, we leveraged everything. Everything, I repeated. Our savings, she said quickly. Lines of credit. And yes, your account. There it was. How much? I asked. Silence fell over the table like a dropped curtain. Claire inhaled. After the initial transfers, there were additional movements. We meant to explain. How much, Claire? Her voice dropped. 323,000. The room felt suddenly airless. My retirement balance as of January 31st had been $412,300. 323,000. Plus the 86 from Tuesday morning. I did the arithmetic automatically. There was almost nothing left. You emptied my accounts, I said. Daniel straightened. We invested them. Daniel's mother shifted uncomfortably. Well, surely Frank understands growth strategies. I did not authorize $323,000, I said evenly. Claire's cheeks flushed. You gave me access. Access, I replied, is not ownership. Daniel's tone hardened. You weren't using it. It was sitting there depreciating in real terms. We're family. The upside benefits everyone. Everyone, I repeated. Claire's eyes flashed. Why are you acting like a victim? She snapped louder now. This project will change everything for us. For Ethan. For you. For me? Yes, she insisted. When it pays out, you'll be comfortable forever. I almost laughed. I am 71, I said quietly. I was already supposed to be comfortable forever. The apple crumble was brought out then, as if dessert could absorb attention. Daniel tried again, smoother this time. Frank, you've always said money should work. Well, now it's working. At risk, I corrected. All investments carry risk. With someone else's consent, I said. Claire's fork clattered against her plate. You would rather hoard it than see us build something meaningful? I looked at her, truly looked. The woman across from me was not the little girl who used to sit at the kitchen counter doing math homework while Margaret stirred soup. She was composed, sharp, and patient. You didn't build this, I said slowly. You borrowed it. Daniel's jaw tightened. Legally, the funds are transferred under authorized credentials. So you believe this is legal? I asked. He met my eyes. Yes. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Until then, I had hoped for embarrassment, for apology, for a flicker of shame. Instead, I saw a calculation. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. I want copies of every agreement related to Riverside, I said. Partnership contracts, loan documents, electronic authorization logs, all of it. Claire stared at me. And if we don't, then tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m., I will meet with an attorney. Daniel let out a short, humorless laugh. He'd sue your own daughter over an investment? No, I said. I will sue over theft. Gasps around the table. Daniel's father muttered something about overreaction. Claire stood abruptly. How dare you, she hissed. After everything we've included you in. Included me in. As silent capital. You included me in risk, I replied. Without choice. The candles flickered as someone shifted in their seat. For a long second, no one spoke. And Ethan, voice small, asked, Mom? Claire didn't look at him. I rose slowly. The room seemed louder now, forks scraping, chairs shifting. Whispered reassurances from Daniel to his parents. At the door, Claire followed me. Dad, she said, voice lower now, urgent. If you pull out, we lose the deposit. We lose credibility. We could be personally liable. You should have considered that at 8:55 a.m., I answered. She grabbed my sleeve. Don't destroy us. I gently removed her hand. I didn't, I said. You just discovered I'm not already destroyed. Outside, the evening air felt colder than before. As I walked to my car, I realized something that settled heavier than the numbers. The house on Hawthorne Drive, the blue door, the Lexus in the driveway. None of it had ever truly been theirs. It had been leveraged on me. At 8:42 a.m. Monday morning, I sat in the office of a man named Richard Cole, attorney at law, Suite 314. The building smelled faintly of dust and printer toner. His receptionist had offered me coffee from a small Keurig machine, the kind that hisses before it commits to brewing. I declined. I wanted my head clear. Richard was younger than I expected. Early 50s, precise haircut, navy suit that fit properly. No flashy cufflinks. A thin gold wedding band. He listened without interrupting. I placed a folder on his desk, 12 months of statements, printed authorization logs the bank manager had provided, and a sheet of paper where I had written the numbers in my own hand. Initial balance, January 31st, $412,300. Transfers prior to February 18th, $323,150. February 18th wires, $86,650. Remaining liquid funds, $2,500, checking. I had circled the last figure twice. Richard adjusted his glasses and leaned back. Did you sign a formal power of attorney? He asked. No. Any written agreement permitting discretionary investment? No. Did you ever authorize transfers of this magnitude verbally or in writing? I authorized access, not discretion. He nodded once. Access, he said carefully, is not the same as fiduciary authority. If she used your credentials without explicit consent for these specific transfers, that can constitute unauthorized use, potentially fraud. The word did not shock me anymore. Fraud. It sounded clinical in his office, almost polite. What are my options? I asked. Richard ticked them off on his fingers. First, immediate formal dispute with the bank. That freezes further outgoing transfers and initiates an internal investigation. That's already started. Good. Second, a demand letter to your daughter and son-in-law requiring documentation of every transaction and immediate restitution. Third, if funds are invested in a development partnership, we file a lease pendens against the property, essentially clouding the title. That prevents sale or refinancing without resolving your claim. I looked at him. You can do that? Yes. And if they refuse, we pursue civil action, potentially criminal referral. Though that is not my first recommendation unless they escalate. Criminal referral. The phrase pressed against my chest. Richard must have noticed. Mr. Harlan, he said quietly, I know this is family, but what you've described is systematic transfer of substantial funds without documented authorization. The law does not become softer because the signature belongs to someone you raised. He slid a yellow legal pad toward me. I need you to list every instance of money you provided them over the past 3 years. Exact dates and amounts if possible. I wrote for 27 minutes. $12,500. Bridge financing, October 2nd, 2023. $9,800. Braces, March 18th, 2024. $24,000. Down payment, August 5th, 2024. $6,200. Contractor overage, November 21st, 2024. $14,750 temporary payroll gap, January 14th, 2025. $18,900 equipment deposit, February 3rd, 2025. Each line looked smaller than the one before it. Little transfers. Accumulated betrayal. By 9:58 a.m., Richard printed a formal dispute notice and slid it across to me for signature. I hesitated for only a second. Then I signed. The pen felt heavier than it should have. At 12:14 p.m., my phone rang. Claire. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. What have you done? She demanded, skipping greeting entirely. I retained counsel, I replied. You froze the accounts, she said, voice sharp and breathless. Daniel just got a call from the escrow officer. Our funds are flagged. Our funds, I repeated. You're jeopardizing a $4.8 million development, she snapped. Do you understand what that means? I understand what $323,000 means, I said. You gave me access. I gave you trust. There was a sound on the line. Maybe she was pacing. You're humiliating us, she said. Daniel's partners are asking questions. Good, I answered. A pause. You are going to regret this, she said quietly. Not shouted, not hysterical. Calm. It was the calm that unsettled me. Why? I asked. Because if this deal collapses, we're personally liable for the earnest deposit and bridge fees. That's $55,000 in penalties. We don't have that liquidity without your funds. There it was, dependence disguised as strategy. He should not have built a structure that collapses without my pension, I said. Silence. Then softer. You'd really see a sink? I would see accountability. She ended the call. By 3:30 p.m., Richard had filed a formal notice with the bank and prepared a demand letter requiring immediate disclosure of all contracts tied to Caldwell Development Group and Riverside Residences. He read part of it aloud. Failure to provide documentation within 72 hours will result in immediate civil action seeking restitution, damages, and injunctive relief. 72 hours. 3 days. I drove home under a sky the color of dull steel. The house felt quieter than usual when I stepped inside. I removed my coat, hung it on Margaret's brass hook. On the kitchen table, I spread out my old financial folders, 20 years of careful statements, CD, renewal notices, handwritten calculations in the margins. I noticed something I hadn't before. In June 2023, when I first shared credentials, there was a test transfer of $500, then $1,200 in July, then nothing significant until October. A gradual increase, like someone testing how far a rope will stretch before it snaps. I sat down in Margaret's old chair. My hands did not tremble anymore. At 6:07 p.m., an email arrived from Claire. Subject: Riverside documentation. Attached: 3 PDF files. Partnership agreement. Capital contribution schedule. Electronic authorization logs. I opened the third document first. There, in digital ink, was my name, Franklin Harlan. Timestamp: February 18, 8:55 a.m. Authorized via OTP code. I checked my phone history. At 8:54 a.m., there had been a text. Verification code: 774921. I had been in the kitchen, buttering toast. The message must have flashed briefly across my lock screen. Claire had been in the house the night before. She'd helped me set up a new photo album on the phone. She had held it in her hands for several minutes. She had seen how it unlocked. Paper trails, digital fingerprints, quiet theft. At 6:42 p.m., I forwarded the documents to Richard with a single line. Proceed. For the first time since the bank called at 9:17 a.m., I felt something steady beneath my ribs. Not rage, not grief, resolution. Because money can be rebuilt slowly with time. But dignity, once surrendered without protest, never returns on its own. And I had just signed the first paper that demanded it back. The second call came at 2:16 p.m. on Thursday. Not from Claire, from Daniel. I was in my garage, wiping dust off the old Craftsman toolbox I've had since 1989. The metal latch sticks, unless you press it just right. Margaret used to complain about the smell of motor oil clinging to my sweaters. The phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. Frank, Daniel said without greeting. His voice sounded thinner than usual, stretched tight. We need to talk. I assumed we would, I replied. There was a pause. I could hear traffic behind him. A car door slammed. You filed something, he said. Not a question. My attorney did. You placed a lien notice on Riverside. Yes. He exhaled sharply. Do you understand what you've done? I understand precisely what I've done. Silence, then controlled. The title company won't finalize our equity position with that cloud on record. Investors are nervous. One of them already pulled out. That sounds unfortunate. Unfortunate. His voice cracked slightly. Frank, this is a $4.8 million development. We structured the capital stack based on committed funds. Your capital. My retirement, I corrected. You were going to benefit from it. Without being asked. His breathing grew louder. If this collapses, Claire and I are personally exposed for the bridge loan, he said. $55,000 in penalties. Possibly more if the developer sues. You signed the agreement at 8:55 a.m., I reminded him, before informing me. You gave her access, and you used it. There it was again, that line, as if access were a blank check. Daniel lowered his voice. What do you want? It was the first honest sentence he had spoken since this began. I want every dollar returned, I said calmly, or legally secured in my name with full voting rights and liquidation priority. I want a written acknowledgement that the transfers were made without documented authorization, and I want it by tomorrow at noon. You're not negotiating a used car, he snapped. This is real estate finance. So is my future. Another long pause. You're willing to drag your daughter through court? He asked. I closed the toolbox gently. She dragged herself when she used my phone to confirm a code at 8:54 a.m. Silence. Then, for the first time, I heard something I hadn't before. Uncertainty. I'll call you back, he muttered. He didn't. At 11:03 a.m. Friday. Richard called me instead. They responded. He said, Your daughter's counsel reached out this morning. Counsel, I repeated. Yes. Apparently Daniel retained a firm late yesterday. They're requesting a meeting at the bank at 1:30 p.m. They prefer to resolve this before filing becomes public record. Public record. I pictured the development brochure, glossy, confident. Luxury urban living, built on borrowed breath. I'll be there, I said. At 1:27 p.m., I walked into the main branch conference room. Glass walls, polished table, bottled water arranged in a neat row. Claire sat on one side, Daniel beside her. A man in a charcoal suit, their attorney, flipping through a leather portfolio. Claire did not look at me when I entered. She looked tired, not angry, not triumphant, tired. Richard shook my hand. We sat opposite them. The bank's compliance officer joined via speakerphone at 1:34 p.m. Daniel's attorney began. My clients acknowledged that certain transfers were initiated using shared credentials. However, they believed they were acting within implied authority granted by Mr. Harlan. Richard responded evenly. Implied authority does not extend to discretionary liquidation of 98% of a retiree's assets. 98%. Hearing it stated like that made the room shift slightly. Claire finally looked at me. "We weren't trying to hurt you," she said quietly. "That is not the same as not hurting me," I replied. Documents slid across the table. A proposed settlement. Caldwell Development Group would execute a secured promissory note in my name for $409,800, the total withdrawn principal, at 6% annual interest. My claim would sit senior to all equity partners. Additionally, they would transfer a 15% direct ownership interest in their Riverside stake to me personally. If the project failed, the note would convert into a personal obligation enforceable against Claire and Daniel jointly. In plain language, they would owe me first, and publicly. Daniel's attorney spoke carefully. "This structure protects Mr. Harlan's capital and prevents immediate project collapse." Richard leaned toward me. "It's strong," he murmured. "You become secured creditor, not silent investor." I looked at Claire. "Why didn't you ask?" I said. Her voice broke just slightly. "Because I knew you'd say no." There it was, the truth stripped of justification. "You decided that for me," I said. She swallowed. "Yes." The compliance officer's voice crackled through the speaker. "For clarity, Mr. Harlan, do you consider the prior transfers unauthorized?" Every eye in the room shifted toward me. This was the moment. A single word could push it toward criminal referral, toward headlines, toward something uglier than any of us wanted. I thought of Margaret's kitchen, of Claire at 16, solving compound interest equations on a yellow pad, of the Lexus in the driveway, of the text at 8:54 a.m. "Yes," I said. The word landed solidly. "Unauthorized." Claire closed her eyes. Richard continued smoothly. "However, in the interest of familial resolution, my client is prepared to settle under the terms presented, contingent upon immediate signing and recording." Pens were placed on the table. At 2:12 p.m., Claire signed. At 2:14 p.m., Daniel signed. At 2:16 p.m., I signed. The same minute, the second call had come the day before. The irony did not escape me. By 2:32 p.m., the bank had notarized the agreement and filed the security interest electronically. The lien on Riverside remained, but now it bore my name not as obstruction, but as priority. When we stood to leave, Claire lingered. "Dad," she said softly. I paused. "We'll fix this," she whispered. I studied her face, older than it had been last week. "No," I said gently. "I just did." That evening, I returned home at 5:48 p.m. The house felt the same. Quiet, steady. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my checkbook. The balance would not show $400,000 again for some time. Recovery would depend on contracts in courts and whether glass towers by the river actually rose from the ground. But my name was no longer hidden inside someone else's risk. It was printed clearly at the top of the page. Secured creditor. They had tried to build wealth on the assumption that I would never object. They were wrong, because the bank called me first. And this time I answered. 3 months passed without drama. No shouting. No emergency calls. No midnight accusations. Just paperwork. On April 30th, I received the first formal quarterly report from Caldwell Development Group. It arrived in a thick envelope with my name typed properly. Franklin Harlan, secured creditor. The return address printed neatly in the corner. I opened it at the same kitchen table where the bank had first called me at 9:17 a.m. Projected construction timeline. Revised capital stack. Updated investor list. My name appeared on page 2, not as family contribution, not as silent partner, but as senior secured note holder. $409,800 at 6% APR. Numbers, when they are printed clearly, restore something. The Riverside project had not collapsed. In fact, according to the report, steel deliveries were scheduled for June. Pre-sales were ahead of forecast by 8%. Daniel had included a short letter at the end. Frank, we are moving forward responsibly. Thank you for your patience. No apology, no acknowledgement, just responsibly. I folded the letter once and set it aside. Claire did not visit for 6 weeks after the signing. When she finally came by, it was on a Sunday afternoon at 2:03 p.m. I remember, because I was trimming the hedges with the old electric trimmer that always pulls slightly to the left. She stood at the end of the driveway, hands tucked into the pockets of a beige coat. No Lexus this time. She'd come alone. Hi, she said when I unplugged the trimmer. Hello. The air between us felt less volatile, but not warm. I read the April report, I said before she could begin. Steel delivery in June. She nodded. Yes. We stood like that for a moment, two adults discussing construction instead of betrayal. I didn't understand how much it would scare you, she said finally. It wasn't fear, I replied. It was erasure. She frowned slightly. You decided I no longer had a say, I explained. That my money was already yours. She looked down at the gravel. We thought it was efficient. Efficiency is not morality, I said. A long pause. Then she surprised me. I've sold the Lexus, she said quietly. We're cutting personal expenses until the project stabilizes. I studied her face. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes I hadn't noticed before. That's wise, I answered. I know you think we're reckless, she added. I think you're entitled, I corrected gently. She didn't argue. That was new. By July, the first interest payment arrived. $6,147 wired directly into my restored account. I stared at the confirmation screen longer than necessary. Money earned on money almost taken. The irony did not escape me. I reinvested half into a conservative municipal bond fund and left the rest in cash. Liquidity. My word now. Richard called in August. Riverside's on schedule, he said. You're protected. If anything shifts, we enforce. Protected. A word I hadn't associated with myself in months. In September, there was a small ceremony at the Riverside site. Groundbreaking photos, champagne and plastic flutes. I was not invited. I did not expect to be. But 2 days later, Ethan sent me a picture from his phone. Steel beams rising against a pale sky. Grandpa, it's actually happening. I replied with a single word. Good. Because I meant it. I did not want them ruined. I wanted them responsible. There is a difference. On November 12th, Claire came for dinner. I made pot roast. Margaret's recipe. She stood in the kitchen, watching me slice carrots. You never asked for an apology, she said suddenly. I didn't need the word, I replied. I needed the boundary. She leaned against the counter. Are we okay, she asked. I considered that carefully. We are defined, I said. She exhaled, not entirely satisfied, but not wounded either. We ate quietly, not awkwardly, just deliberately. When she left at 8:41 p.m., she hugged me. Not tightly, not theatrically, just long enough to acknowledge something fragile had survived. I still wake at 6:00 a.m. I still count numbers. But I no longer confuse generosity with surrender. The Riverside project will either succeed or fail based on steel, concrete, and market demand. That is their gamble. Mine was simpler. To believe that love requires silence. It does not. Love requires clarity. On the morning the bank called, I thought I had lost everything that proved my life had been careful. I was wrong. The money moved. The dignity did not. Interest accrues in many forms. Some of it is financial. The rest is the quiet knowledge that when someone tried to build their future on my assumption of weakness, I answered calmly, legally, and in ink. The bank called me first, and by the end, my name was the one that mattered most on the page.